guys, Ellie here in the garden, and as you know, the worm bins have been on my mind for a while, so today we're going to do something about it. This is my original system that I put together, and the reason I did it in a small scale was to see whether or not you could compost in a small space, because I'm a small space gardener, but at the same time, it was always to take over Duncan's worm farm and give that a better lease on life. This is my original worm composting system, and it comprises of 3 buckets. So the base bucket catches any runoff liquid. As you can see, there is a bit in there. There's even a worm in there. And that is your worm tea. Then it has a middle layer, and that for me is my worm bedding. And as you can see, it's quite moist because we've had a very rainy season, but we do have worms. And we have some worms climbing their way through to the very next level, which brings us to our top level, and that is where we essentially feed our worms, and that is done using food scraps. So I've got this little fork. I just want to move this around. There's already some worms here, so there's definitely abundance of worm life. Oh, they're absolutely loving it. So it does work, and it does generate you compost. Now, if you're in a small environment like a tiny space garden or a container garden, this is a perfect method, because eventually this will become your worm castings or your compost, and it is good organic matter. It's lovely fertile soil. So essentially you want to use that in your containers and things. This you could put little bits in each. You could use it like in a micro-dosing sense, or you could just add a little bit every time you plant new plants, and it can keep generating soil health for you, because we all know as gardeners that is really where your garden is going to learn to flourish and fight diseases, in its soil, so we try and prep it for that. And once you've emptied out this middle container, your compost, you would then switch your buckets, and this piece where they are currently composting will then become their bedding area. Once they've decomposed all the food in there and turned it into compost, they will naturally migrate from this middle section to the top section and start breaking down the fresher food on the top. Okay guys, so for this particular worm level up, essentially what I'm doing is I'm transforming these butcher's boxes into my next worm system. Let me show you what I've got. Right, so there was a time where Duncan bought 3 butcher's boxes, and they were intended for this purpose. So this container over here is empty for the most part and already has a drainage hole, and that was so that there could be a tap put in here to catch the worm tea. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to still use this particular container as my catchment bucket. So that makes this my base layer, and we're going to move it right over here. So let's put it in place. So for this worm box, the idea is to create a system using what we've already got, because you already know I'm cheap and I don't like to waste money. The secondary container holds liquid because it has no holes in it, but we are going to change that. But for now, this is just rainwater, and I'm going to feed it to the garden. So this is the last of the 3 butcher's boxes that we've got, and this one's been through some damage. We've actually grown stuff in here before as a container, and it was very successful. But now it's time for it to do its job. I feel like I could be trying a little harder to create my own compost at home, because it's a lot cheaper than having to go out and buy fertilizers all the time. And if your soil is happy, your plants will be happier. So it does help you knock off some of the future costs, because you won't have to be buying as many pesticides. Well, hopefully at least. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this container over to the other side of the garden, just because that's where it'll be easier to work with it, and I don't want to be carrying them back and forth because they are going to be very heavy. So my plan is to essentially replicate what I have been doing in this small system in the slightly larger one. So I'll have a bucket or a base at least container that'll catch the worm tea, and I'll be able to use that as liquid fertilizer in the garden. And then I would have a middle box, which is bedding, which will be probably, if I'm honest, this container over here. And we need to drill some holes in it so that it can obviously drain into the worm tea container. And then this container I'll probably use as our feeding box on the top, because it does have a crack. I'm going to try and seal it, so we shouldn't lose too much at the top here in that situation. But I will see what the condition of this box is first. So I just want to move these worms to a slightly safer location so that they don't get thrown or knocked around. Right, so since this container has soil in it, I'm actually going to dump it out into our already made chicken compost, because I might need that to backfill the containers. So just tip it out and we'll assess the damage to this container. Actually, looking at it now, it might have holes in it. Ah, what a win! It does have holes in it. Okay, that's even better. It makes my job a little bit easier. Because now instead I just have to make sure these holes are open. And we can start with our second layer straight away. Before I move this bedding container over onto the liquid tea container, I actually want to raise it up a little bit. So I'm going to see if I can find a solution for this problem. Yes, I know this is probably not the right thing. I haven't found the right thing yet. So what I've done is I've used an old container that had a hole in it, and I've just balanced this on here as evenly as I can. I know this is probably stupid, but I'm going to do it anyway. So now that I've got this empty container, the one with the hole in for drainage, I'm actually going to now put the bedding box on the top, which is the second butcher's box that had holes in it already. I do want to still assess this damage and see if there's any way I can repair it. I think the plan will be to drill 2 holes, one on either side, and use a cable tie and pull these 2 together. I think that will suffice. Okay, let's open the best. Okay. Okay, so I've got 3 little cable ties. So I'm just going to thread one like that. And then the other one. Okay, I think that'll work. Right, so now the plan is to fill up this container. As you can see, it's not all the way full, and we want it full up until the actual brim here. So when we put the next butcher's box on top, there's no space between them so that the worms can transfer between levels. So I think my next task then is to fill this, and we want to now start incorporating some worms, which brings us to the old box. Right, so my next project, I suppose, is trying to get this into here. So because this box isn't layered, it is somewhat more tricky to access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this top layer off and flip it. No. I'm going to drill the holes in this container. Okay, so I've now drilled the little holes in here, and I've gone around and I've scraped off any of these like hard plastics. See, I've missed one or two. Just so that the worms don't get cut up, or you don't get cut up when you put your hands in here. It's just a little bit better for everybody that way. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take the top layer off of this old worm box and add it to the top layer of this new worm box. Okay, here we go. Right, so now I've done this and I filled it quite full, but I am going to supplement this large container with some of the worms from my container and do a slight refresh here. I'm going to keep my top bucket. So what I've done is I've just tipped the bottom layer of my bucket, and I know that there are worms in here. So I'm just going to essentially be inoculating this bedding with my worms that I've been growing. Only partial because they've already started migrating to the top, and I know that this worm bin could use the extra goodness at this point in time, especially because I want it to be successful. So now I'm just going to come along and put the top layer on here, which already has some of that bedding. You don't mind if this compresses. You prefer it, honestly. And now I can start filling it with some food scraps. Alright, so I've got little bits and pieces from in the kitchen, a couple of potatoes that I'm going to throw in here. My wax wraps I'm also going to throw in here, and some scraps. Alright, so I'm going to leave it just like that, but now I can't leave my worm box exposed like this to all the elements. I'm going to come around and lay a layer of newspaper on the top that will hold the moisture in and act somewhat as a lid. I am, however, before I put this worm box to bed, going to give it a good water, and I'm going to use a little bit of previously brewed worm tea for it. So as you can see, the water is doing what it should, and it is essentially seeping out worm tea out the base of our container. Right, so now that our tower is built and well watered, I'm going to close it up and leave them to settle for a while. Right, so as you just saw, I tipped the base layer, my compost layer, my worm bedding section of this container, this tower at least, into this compost bucket. So what I'm going to do is take out all of the contents of this container and tip it out into this bin. Give it a bit of a tap like with a cake. Let everything fall through. As you can see, we are slap loaded with worms here. So I'll leave this section of the container as it is and add in 2 or 3 scoops from this worm container. Maybe 1 more. So they've got room to grow. And place this bucket on the top and close it up. Now this one is refreshed and can continue to build us a few more worms over time. Right, so for the top of this container I have already put down a piece of newspaper, and I have another set that I'm just going to lay on top of that. This will eventually be replaced with a piece of cardboard, but for now this will be the trick to help lock that moisture in slightly. Now that I've got the paper, I am going to use this plastic tray on the inside, just like that, because I do have a couple of holes in this lid that was caused by the hail, so that'll act as a bit of a buffer on that particular side should it rain. And I'm not too worried about the rest of the holes. I do want the box to have oxygen and to get rained on and to naturally break things down. I will then take the remaining compost and mix it in to this wheelbarrow, and we're going to use that to backfill all our containers. But that's not going to happen today. I guess this is where I'm going to leave you, and I'm going to say thanks for hanging out with me today. I really did enjoy myself building that worm box. Let's hope I have the same success on a larger scale as I did on a smaller one. See you next time, guys. Enjoy your weekend.